The arrival. The city of New Haven was alive with its usual hum of activity. Cars honked, people hurried along the sidewalks, and the skies were clear and blue. It was just another ordinary day. Until it wasn't. A shadow fell over the city, massive and unnatural. At first, people thought it was a cloud. But as the shadow grew darker and larger, everyone looked up. Hovering silently above the skyline was an enormous alien craft, its surface gleaming like polished metal. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. No engines, no sound, just an eerie silence. The streets erupted into chaos. People screamed, ran, and stared in terror. Phones buzzed with alerts. News channels switched to live coverage, broadcasting images of the massive ship to every corner of the world. Governments issued emergency warnings. Fighter jets scrambled into the air, circling the craft but keeping their distance. Then it happened. A voice, calm and commanding, filled the air. It wasn't coming from speakers or radios. It seemed to resonate everywhere at once. In the streets, in homes, even in people's minds. The voice spoke in perfect English, though it was heard in every language on earth. Humans. The voice said, deep and steady, I am Xarin, the arbiter of your fate. You have one chance to prove yourselves worthy. I am ready, but I won't wait forever. The message repeated twice before the voice fell silent. No one knew what to do. World leaders held emergency meetings, scientists speculated about the ship's origins, and religious leaders called it a sign from the heavens. But ordinary people could only wait, staring at the sky in fear and awe. In a small mechanic's garage on the edge of the city, Jake Miller wiped his greasy hands on a rag, staring at the television mounted in the corner. The broadcast showed the alien ship, unmoving, silent, and mysterious. Jake wasn't a scientist or a soldier. He was just a guy who fixed cars. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a global event. It felt personal. As Jake stood there, his phone buzzed with a flurry of messages from friends and family, all asking the same questions. What is this? What do they want? Are we going to be okay? Jake didn't have answers. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the ship. It wasn't like a laser. It was soft, almost like a spotlight. The beam moved slowly, scanning the city. People ducked and hid, unsure of what it might do. Jake watched on TV as the beam swept closer to his neighborhood. And then the light hit his garage. Before Jake could react, the beam enveloped him. It wasn't hot or cold. It was just there, surrounding him in a soft glow. The world around him blurred, and he felt weightless, like he was floating. When the light faded, Jake found himself standing in a strange room. The walls pulsed with a faint blue light, and the floor felt smooth and warm under his boots. There was no furniture, no visible doors, just an endless expanse of glowing walls. Welcome, Jake Miller, the voice of Xarin echoed. It wasn't coming from one place. It was everywhere. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Why me? He asked, his voice trembling. I'm nobody. I don't know anything about aliens or saving the world. You underestimate yourself, Xarin replied. Your world's fate does not rest in the hands of the powerful or the brilliant. It rests in the hands of those who understand what it means to be human. Before Jake could ask what that meant, a shimmering form appeared before him. It was Xarin. The being was tall and humanoid, with glowing eyes and a body made of swirling light. It wasn't solid, but it felt real enough to make Jake take a step back. I have chosen you, Xarin said, to lead your kind in a test that will determine your future. Humanity's survival depends on your ability to solve a riddle, a truth buried deep within your history. Jake blinked, his mind racing. I don't know anything about riddles. I'm just a mechanic. Xarin tilted its head, the glowing eyes narrowing slightly. You are more than what you believe yourself to be, Jake Miller. The question is, will you rise to the challenge, or will you let fear consume you? Before Jake could respond, Sauron raised a hand, and the room shifted. Screens appeared around Jake, showing images of Earth's history, wars, peace, progress, and destruction. It was overwhelming, but Jake couldn't look away. "This is your chance," Sauron said. "Prove that humanity is worthy. But be warned, my patience is not infinite. The clock is already ticking." As the words sank in, Jake felt the weight of the moment. He wasn't a hero or a genius. He was just Jake. But if this was humanity's only chance, he couldn't walk away. Taking a deep breath, he looked up at Sauron. "I'll try," Jake said, his voice steady despite his fear. "I don't know if I'm the right person, but I'll try." Sauron's glowing eyes flickered, almost as if it were smiling. "Then let us begin." And just like that, the room around Jake transformed again, plunging him into the first stage of humanity's greatest test. The test is revealed. Jake stood in the shimmering room, his breath echoing in the silence. The images of Earth's history, projected on the walls, faded into a soft, pulsating light. Sauron stood before him, its glowing figure radiating an otherworldly calm, though its presence was anything but reassuring. Jake could feel the weight of the moment, but he couldn't shake the question burning in his mind. "Why me?" Jake asked again, his voice firmer this time. "Out of everyone on Earth, why choose someone like me?" Sauron's gaze seemed to pierce into Jake's soul, reading him like an open book. "You are not the only one who wonders this," Sauron said, its voice resonating like distant thunder. "But this test is not about your strength, your knowledge, or your status. It is about something deeper, something every human shares but often forgets. You will see in time." Before Jake could argue, Sauron raised a hand, and the floor beneath him shifted. It felt as though the ground dissolved. Yet Jake didn't fall. Instead, he was carried upwards in a beam of light, weightless but fully conscious, his surroundings transformed. He now stood in a vast chamber, circular and seemingly endless. The walls shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting Jake's wide-eyed expression back at him. Around the room floated strange orbs, each glowing with a faint blue light. Symbols and images danced across their surfaces, shifting and morphing before disappearing into the ether. "This is the archive," Sauron said, appearing beside Jake without warning. Jake jumped, but Sauron didn't seem to notice or care. "Within these orbs lie fragments of your history, your achievements, your failures. But they also hold a secret, a riddle encoded in your DNA and in the stories you've passed down through generations. This riddle is the key to your survival." Jake blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. "A riddle? In our DNA? What does that even mean?" "Long before you were aware of it," Sauron explained, "your ancestors received knowledge from beyond. A seed of understanding was planted within your kind, a warning, a guide. Over time, it was buried, forgotten. But it remains within you, waiting to be uncovered." Jake took a step forward, staring at the floating orbs. Each one seemed alive, pulsating with energy. He reached out to touch one, but his hand passed through it, sending ripples across its surface. The orb responded, projecting an image into the air. Jake saw a scene from Earth's ancient past, a group of humans gathered around a fire, carving symbols into stone. "This riddle is not something you can solve alone," Sauron continued. "It requires the collective wisdom of your people, but the responsibility to begin, to lead, falls on you." "Great," Jake muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "No pressure." As if hearing his sarcasm, Sauron's glowing eyes narrowed. "The survival of your species is no trivial matter, Jake Miller. Your hesitation will cost precious time." Jake straightened, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. "Okay," he said. "What do I do first?" Sauron gestured toward the floating orbs, and they began to spin faster and faster, until they formed a whirlwind of light around Jake. He shielded his eyes, but Sauron's voice was clear despite the chaos. "You must choose others to aid you," Sauron said. "I will bring them here, but the decision is yours. Select wisely, for their skills and perspectives will shape your success or your failure. Before Jake could respond, the orb stopped spinning, and 5 beams of light descended from above. Each beam revealed a holographic figure, frozen in place. Jake stepped closer, examining each one. The first figure was a woman in a lab coat, her expression focused and intense. Dr. Elena Carter, Sarin said, a geneticist and expert in evolutionary biology. The second was an older man holding a book, Professor Daniel Reed. Taran continued, historian and linguist, with extensive knowledge of ancient civilizations. The third figure was a young woman, her hands poised over a glowing tablet. Tashin Nguyen, cybersecurity specialist and problem solver. The fourth was a teenager, no older than 16, wearing a hoodie and sneakers. His face was lit with curiosity and mischief. Miles Carter, Sarin said, a prodigy in logic puzzles and pattern recognition. The final figure was a tall, imposing man in military fatigues. Captain Marcus Steele, car unfinished, tactician and leader with experience in high-pressure scenarios. Jake stared at the figures, overwhelmed. You want me to choose now? Yes, Sarin replied. But you must choose with care. These are not just individuals. They represent the strengths and weaknesses of your species. Together, they will face the challenges ahead. But together, they must also overcome their differences. Jake hesitated, his eyes darting between the figures. How was he supposed to decide something like this? Sarin's words echoed in his mind. The survival of your species depends on you. Finally, he took a deep breath and made his selections. Bring them all, Jake said. If we're going to do this, we need every strength we can get. Sarin tilted its head, as if considering Jake's decision. Interesting, it said. You value unity above efficiency. Let us see if that choice serves you well. The figures dissolved into light, and Sarin raised its hand again. Prepare yourself, Jake Miller. Your team will soon arrive, and the true test will begin. Before Jake could ask what that meant, the chamber filled with a low hum, and he felt the weight of the challenge ahead pressing down on him. This was only the beginning. A team assembles. Jake stood in the vast chamber, the hum of Sarin's ship, a constant reminder of the strange and surreal reality he was now part of. Moments ago, he had made the decision to bring the entire group, scientists, a historian, a military captain, and even a teenage puzzle prodigy, onto the ship. He wasn't entirely sure if it was the right choice, but unity felt like the only way forward. As the glowing walls shifted and pulsed, beams of light shot down from above. One by one, the chosen individuals materialized in the chamber. Their expressions varied. Some were calm and collected, others confused, and one looked outright terrified. Where am I? Dr. Elena Carter demanded, her sharp eyes scanning the alien surroundings. She clutched a notebook in one hand, her knuckles white. What is this place? Who brought me here? Captain Marcus Steele barked, his voice authoritative and commanding. His hand instinctively went to his side, where a weapon would have been if he hadn't been transported directly from a military base. Whoa, this is insane. Miles Carter, the teenager, grinned as he turned in circles, taking in the glowing walls and floating orbs. Am I dreaming? This looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Professor Daniel Reed adjusted his glasses, his face a mix of fear and fascination. I don't understand. This can't be real. The last arrival, Tashin Nguyen, was already examining the floor beneath her feet, her fingers twitching as if itching to unlock the mysteries of the ship. This tech, she murmured, her voice low but filled with awe. This is light years ahead of anything we've ever seen. Quiet. Sarin's voice boomed, silencing the group instantly. The alien entity appeared in the center of the chamber, its glowing form towering over the humans. All eyes turned to it, a mix of awe and fear on their faces. Welcome, humans, Sarin said, its voice resonating through the room. You have been chosen to represent your species in a trial that will determine your survival. The one who brought you here, Jake Miller, has placed his faith in you. Will you rise to the challenge? The group turned to Jake, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the room. He raised a hand in a small wave. Hey. Yeah, this is as weird for me as it is for you. Probably more. You brought us here, Captain Steele said, his tone sharp. Who are you, and what gives you the right to drag us into this mess? Calm down, Captain, Professor Reed interjected, his voice soothing. Let's not jump to conclusions. Clearly, there's something much larger at play here. Jake sighed and stepped forward. Look, I didn't exactly volunteer for this, okay? Sauron picked me, just like it picked you. Apparently, humanity's survival depends on us solving some ancient riddle. I don't know why I'm here, but if this is real, and trust me, it is, we don't have a choice. Dr. Carter frowned, crossing her arms. A riddle? What kind of riddle? Zarin raised its hand, and the orbs in the room began to spin, casting shadows and light across the walls. Images flickered to life. Humans building pyramids, carving symbols into stone, creating art and music. Scenes of war and peace flashed by in rapid succession. The riddle, Sauron said, is a truth buried deep within your history and your very DNA. It is the key to proving your worth as a species. Together, you must uncover it. But beware, the test will challenge not only your intellect, but your unity, your resilience, and your capacity for hope. Tashin Nguyen, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. What happens if we fail? She asked, her voice calm, but laced with apprehension. Extinction, Sauron replied simply. The weight of the word hung in the air, suffocating in its finality. Miles broke the silence, his youthful energy breaking through the tension. Well, no pressure then, he said with a nervous laugh. We just have to save the world. Easy, right? Enough, Sauron said. You will begin now. Without warning, the chamber transformed. The glowing walls dissolved, replaced by a simulation of Earth, a forest, dense and alive with sounds of nature. The team stood on soft grass, surrounded by towering trees. In the distance, a waterfall roared. What is this? Dr. Carter asked, her voice sharp with curiosity. A trial. Sauron's voice echoed, though the entity was nowhere to be seen. Each of you has a role to play. Only by working together can you proceed. On the ground in front of them lay a strange device, covered in alien symbols. A faint hum emanated from it, and a series of lights blinked in a sequence that seemed almost rhythmic. Miles knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the symbols. This looks like a puzzle, he said. I think I can figure it out. Not so fast, Captain Steele said, placing a hand on Miles' shoulder. We don't know what it does. It could be a trap. Tasha crouched next to Miles, her eyes narrowing as she studied the device. He's right about one thing. It's definitely a puzzle. But this isn't just random. These symbols look like a combination of math and language. Dr. Carter joined them, her scientific curiosity overcoming her initial hesitation. If this is tied to the riddle Sauron mentioned, we need to decode it. Let me see. As the group gathered around the device, Jake stepped back, watching them. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. They were different. Different ages, different skills, different perspectives. But maybe that was exactly what they needed. All right, Jake said, stepping forward. Let's figure this out. Together. The team exchanged glances, and for the first time, a tentative sense of unity began to form. They didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They would face it together. The countdown begins. The waterfall roared in the background, its mist cooling the air around them. The forest simulation was almost peaceful, but the tension in the group was anything but. Jake, standing slightly apart from the others, felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. Hazaran's words echoed in his mind. The clock is already ticking. All right, Jake said, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. We need to figure out this puzzle. Saran made it pretty clear. We don't have unlimited time. Just as he finished speaking, a deep rhythmic hum filled the air. The group looked around, alarmed, as the sky above them shifted. A translucent countdown appeared, floating in the air like a hologram. 72 o'clock, 00. The numbers ticked down by the second. 72 hours, Tasha Nguyen murmured, her sharp eyes fixed on the countdown. 3 days. That's all we've got. 3 days until what? Miles Carter asked, his voice laced with nervous energy. Until the Earth explodes. Until Xaran decides we're not worth saving. Let's not waste time finding out, Captain Steele said firmly. He turned to Jake. You're supposed to be leading this, right? What's the plan? Jake hesitated, feeling the eyes of the group on him. The plan is, we figure this out. One step at a time. That device over there, he pointed at the strange object they had discovered earlier, is our first step. Dr. Elena Carter, the geneticist, crouched next to the device. This isn't just a puzzle. It's a test of logic and understanding. Look at the symbols. They're connected to human biology. The team gathered around her as she pointed to the glowing patterns etched into the device. This one here, she said, tracing her finger along a spiral, looks like the double helix of DNA. And these symbols next to it. They're sequences, nucleotides. A, T, G, and C. Professor Reed adjusted his glasses, leaning in for a closer look. Interesting. But why incorporate DNA into a puzzle? What's Xaran trying to make us understand? Maybe it's about how we evolved, Tasha suggested. Or something hidden in our genetic code, like Xaran mentioned. Miles snapped his fingers, a grin spreading across his face. Wait, I've got it. What if it's like a combination lock? We have to figure out the right sequence. That could work, Tasha said, nodding. But we'll need to decode the patterns first. The group began working together, their initial tension giving way to focused determination. Tasha and Miles worked on the sequence patterns, their quick thinking and problem-solving skills complementing each other. Dr. Carter analyzed the biological aspects, while Professor Reed provided historical and linguistic insights. Even Captain Steele, who initially seemed out of place, kept a sharp eye on their progress, ready to step in when needed. Jake, watching them work, felt a strange mix of pride and doubt. This was humanity's best shot, but was it enough? As they worked, the countdown continued to tick away, a constant reminder of their limited time. Hours passed, and the group began to feel the strain. Frustration bubbled to the surface when their first attempt to unlock the device failed. This doesn't make any sense, Miles exclaimed, throwing his hands in the air. We've tried every combination we can think of. Calm down, Captain Steele said, his voice steady but firm. Getting worked up won't help. Easy for you to say, Miles shot back. You're not the one trying to crack this thing. Enough, Jake said, stepping between them. His voice was calm, but carried an edge. We don't have time to fight. If we mess this up, we're all done. So let's refocus and try again. The group fell silent, Jake's words sinking in. Slowly, they returned to their work, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. It was Tasha who finally spotted the breakthrough. Wait, she said, her eyes lighting up. The symbols aren't just sequences. They're coordinates. Coordinates? Dr. Carter asked, frowning. Yes, Tasha replied, pointing to a series of numbers embedded in the patterns. If we map these out, they might lead us to something important. Professor Reed nodded, his face lighting up with realization. Coordinates tied to Earth's history, perhaps. Locations where pivotal events occurred. That's a stretch, Miles said, skeptical. Maybe, Jake interjected, but it's the best lead we've got. Let's follow it. As Tasha input the coordinates into the device, the entire chamber shifted. The forest dissolved, replaced by a vast desert landscape. In the distance, an ancient ruin loomed, half buried in sand. "What is this place?" Dr. Carter asked, her voice filled with awe. "Looks like our next stop," Captain Steele said, already stepping forward. As the team moved toward the ruins, the countdown continued to tick away. Jake couldn't help but glance at it every few minutes, the numbers now reading 64, 12, 47. They were running out of time. But for the first time, Jake felt a flicker of hope. The group was beginning to work together, their differences melding into strengths. But the test was far from over, and Jake knew the hardest challenges were yet to come. Sabotage and secrets. The ruins loomed before them, ancient and weathered, half buried under centuries of shifting sands. The sun, or at least the simulation of it, beat down on their backs as the team approached. Strange symbols etched into the stone walls glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was both eerie and mesmerizing. "This place feels alive," Dr. Carter whispered, her hand brushing over the glowing carvings. "It's ancient," Professor Reed said, his voice tinged with reverence. "But not in the way we understand time. This structure, this language, doesn't belong to Earth. It predates anything we know." "Fascinating," Tasha muttered, snapping pictures with a small scanner Xaron had provided. "But we're here to find answers, not marvel at the architecture." Miles was already darting ahead, his curiosity overriding caution. "Hey, look at this," he called, crouching by what appeared to be a console embedded in the ground. "It's got those weird symbols again, but they're lighting up in a pattern." Captain Steele stepped forward, his hand instinctively resting on the side of his belt, where a weapon would have been if Xaron hadn't stripped him of all gear. "Careful, kid. We don't know what that thing does." "I'm not touching it," Miles shot back, rolling his eyes. "Relax." Jake, standing at the edge of the group, kept an uneasy watch. Something about this place felt off, as if the air itself carried a warning. Xaron's words about an unseen force interfering with their mission echoed in his mind. What if this ruin wasn't just a test, but a trap? "Let's focus," Jake said, stepping into the center of the group. "We've got a countdown breathing down our necks, and this ruin is here for a reason. If we can figure out what these symbols mean, maybe we'll get the next piece of the puzzle." As the team began examining the ruins more closely, something shifted in the air. The faint hum that had accompanied them since they arrived grew louder, more insistent. "What's that sound?" Dr. Carter asked, her brow furrowing. "It's coming from the console," Tasha said, her fingers flying across the scanner in her hand. "Something's activating." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them trembled. The glowing symbols on the walls flared bright, casting the entire chamber in a pulsating light. And then, just as suddenly, everything went dark. "Everyone okay?" Jake called out, his voice echoing in the silence. "I'm fine," Tasha said. But that wasn't random. Something triggered it. "It wasn't me," Miles said quickly, his voice defensive. "No one's blaming you," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. A low growl reverberated through the chamber, sending a chill down everyone's spine. It wasn't human, nor did it sound like any machine they had encountered so far. "What was that?" Professor Reed asked, his voice trembling. Captain Steele's eyes darted around the room, his stance shifting into a defensive posture. "Stay close and stay alert," he said. "We're not alone." Before anyone could respond, the glow returned. But this time, it was different. The symbols on the walls began rearranging themselves, shifting into new patterns that none of their scanners could decode. The ground cracked open, revealing a hidden passage leading deep underground. "Looks like we're going down," Jake said, trying to sound braver than he felt. The team hesitated, but one by one, they descended into the darkness. The passage was narrow and steep, and the air grew colder the deeper they went. The hum of the ruins followed them, growing louder with every step. As they reached the bottom, The passage opened into a cavernous room. In the center stood a pedestal with a glowing orb hovering above it. The orb pulsed with a hypnotic light, casting long shadows across the chamber. "What is it?" Dr. Carter asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Looks important," Tasha said, stepping closer. "Don't touch it," Steele barked, his tone sharp. But before anyone could act, the orb flared brighter, and a holographic figure appeared in the air above it. It wasn't Kaxaran. This figure was darker, its form jagged and menacing. Its voice was a harsh rasp, filled with malice. "So the humans have reached the threshold," it said, its glowing eyes scanning the group. "Pathetic creatures, clinging to hope where none exists." "Who are you?" Jake demanded, stepping forward despite the fear gripping his chest. "I am the Watcher," the figure said, its voice dripping with disdain. "A guardian of this test, though not for your benefit. Your kind's survival is an affront to the order of the universe. You should have perished long ago." The team exchanged uneasy glances. "You're trying to sabotage us," Jake said, realization dawning. "You don't want us to pass this test." "Correct," the Watcher said. "But I don't need to do anything. Your kind will destroy itself, as it always does. Even now, one among you is ensuring your failure." The group froze. "What do you mean?" Steele growled, his hand curling into a fist. The Watcher's form flickered, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You will find out soon enough. Let your paranoia take root. It will hasten your end." With that, the figure vanished, leaving the group in stunned silence. "What did it mean, one among us?" Tasha asked, her voice low and wary. Jake felt his stomach churn. Sarin had warned them about sabotage, but he hadn't expected it to come from within. Now, suspicion hung heavy in the air, threatening to fracture the fragile unity they had built. "We can't let this tear us apart," Jake said, trying to regain control. "The Watcher wants us to fail. That's all this is, a distraction." "Or it's the truth," Steele said grimly, his eyes scanning the group. "We don't know who we can trust." The countdown in Jake's mind ticked louder than ever. 48, 13, 22. The clock was still running, and their biggest enemy might not be the Watcher. It might be each other. The final puzzle. The air in the cavern was thick with tension. The Watcher's ominous words echoed in everyone's minds. "One among you is ensuring your failure." Suspicion hung heavy, and the fragile unity the team had built was crumbling by the second. Jake could feel the weight of their stares as he stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. "Listen, we can't let what that thing said distract us. The Watcher wants us to fail. That's its goal. If we turn on each other now, it wins without lifting a finger." "And what if it wasn't lying?" Captain Steele countered, his sharp gaze sweeping across the group. "What if there is a traitor? Ignoring the possibility could doom us just as much." "Enough," Dr. Carter snapped, surprising everyone with her sharp tone. "We don't have time for this. Look at the clock." Jake glanced at the countdown floating above them. 38, 42, 19. Time was slipping away faster than they could afford. "We focus on the task," Jake said firmly. "The orb, it's obviously tied to the next step. Whatever the Watcher said, we deal with this first." He gestured toward the glowing pedestal in the center of the room. Tasha, ever practical, approached the orb cautiously, her scanner in hand. "The energy readings are off the charts," she said, "but it's not giving off heat or radiation. At least, nothing dangerous. It's waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Miles asked, his voice unsteady. "Interaction," Professor Reed said, stepping closer and adjusting his glasses. "Ancient puzzles like this are rarely straightforward. It's likely tied to human understanding, given Sarin's test." Dr. Carter examined the markings around the pedestal. "These symbols, they're sequences, just like before. DNA again, but they're more complex this time." Miles leaned in, studying the glowing orb. "It's almost like a code. What if the riddle is hidden here?" The Watcher mentioned sabotage, But maybe it's more subtle. What if we're missing something because we're looking at it the wrong way? Jake nodded, the pieces starting to come together. So we need to decode this, and fast. Tasha, Dr. Carter, you work on the symbols. Miles, see if you can find a pattern in the orb's pulses. Steele, keep watch, just in case the Watcher decides to interfere again. Reed, help wherever you can. What about you? Tasha asked, glancing at Jake. I'll oversee, Jake said, feeling the inadequacy of his own words, and I'll try not to mess anything up. The group got to work, their focus laser-sharp despite the lingering tension. The orb pulsed in a rhythmic sequence, casting shifting shadows across the walls. As Tasha and Dr. Carter worked to decode the symbols, Miles called out suddenly. Wait. The pulses, they're syncing with the symbols. He pointed at the orb, excitement lighting up his face. It's like Morse code, but it's based on those DNA sequences we saw earlier. If we match the pulses to the sequences, we might unlock something. Tasha nodded, quickly cross-referencing the patterns on her scanner. Good catch, kid. Let's try this. Minutes felt like hours as they pieced the patterns together. The room grew colder, and the orb's pulsing became erratic, as if it were reacting to their progress, or trying to resist it. Finally, Tasha stepped back, her fingers hovering over the final sequence. Here goes nothing, she said, and pressed the last symbol. The orb flared brightly, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light dimmed, a holographic image appeared in the air above the pedestal. It was a star map, vast and intricate, with a single point glowing brighter than the rest. What is that? Steele asked, his voice low. A location, Reed said, his tone reverent. Somewhere in the galaxy. A destination. Before anyone could respond, Saren's voice filled the chamber. You have reached the final stage of this trial. The riddle is nearly solved, but one piece remains. You must decide. What is the core truth of humanity? What defines your kind and sets you apart? The question hung in the air, as heavy as the tension between them. It's asking for a value judgment, Dr. Carter said, frowning. What makes us human? Hope, resilience. Maybe it's our flaws, Miles offered. We mess up, but we keep trying. Maybe that's the answer. Or unity, Steele said, his voice firm. Working together despite differences. Tasha shook her head. It's more than that. It's our ability to adapt, to innovate. That's what sets us apart. Jake, standing silently in the background, listened to them argue. They were all making valid points, but something felt off. Saren's test wasn't just about intellect or teamwork. It was about something deeper, something they had overlooked. It's all of that, Jake said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. The group turned to look at him. What makes us human isn't one thing. It's everything. Our hope, our unity, our flaws, our ability to adapt. We're not perfect, but we're always growing. That's what defines us. The room fell silent as Jake's words sank in. Tasha stepped forward, glancing at the group. Do we all agree? One by one, they nodded. Steele, Carter, Reed, Miles, all of them. Jake turned to the orb, his heart pounding. Saren, he said, his voice steady. The answer is everything. Humanity is defined by its complexity, its imperfections, and its endless potential to grow and change. The orb pulsed once, then flared brilliantly. The entire chamber shook, and a surge of energy filled the air. When the light faded, the holographic star map shifted, the glowing point expanding into a doorway of shimmering light. The path is open. Saren said, its voice softer now. You have proven yourselves worthy. So far, step through and face the final choice. Jake looked at the team, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Together, they stepped toward the doorway, knowing their hardest challenge was yet to come. Humanity's fate. The shimmering doorway loomed before them, an ethereal portal glowing with a light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their collective heartbeats. Jake glanced at his team: Dr. Carter, Professor Reed, Tasha, Miles, and Captain Steele. Each face was etched with determination, fear, and exhaustion. They had come so far, and now the final test awaited them. "We go together," Jake said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "No matter what's on the other side, we face it as a team." The group nodded, and together they stepped into the portal. The transition was instantaneous. The blinding light gave way to a vast, cosmic void. Stars swirled in the distance, their light reflected in the smooth, glass-like surface beneath their feet. They were standing in what felt like infinity, a place where time and space seemed to have no meaning. In the center of the void stood Xarin, its glowing form more radiant than ever. The alien being was no longer just light. It seemed tangible, as though it had taken on a more solid form for this final encounter. "Welcome to the threshold," Xarin said, its voice resonating across the void. "You have proven yourselves capable of understanding the riddle. Now, the final choice lies before you." A pedestal materialized between them and Xarin. On it were two objects, a glowing blue sphere and a red cube. The symbols etched into them shifted and shimmered, constantly changing. "The blue sphere represents evolution," Xarin explained. "If you choose it, I will unlock humanity's full potential. Your physical and mental capacities will advance beyond anything you can imagine. You will become a species worthy of the stars, capable of shaping your destiny without interference." The team exchanged glances, intrigued but wary. "And the red cube?" Dr. Carter asked. Xarin's form seemed to darken slightly. "The red cube represents preservation. If you choose it, I will leave your world untouched, free to continue as it is. Your future will remain uncertain, shaped by your choices alone. No intervention, no guidance, only the path you create for yourselves." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Both choices were monumental, each carrying unimaginable consequences. Miles was the first to speak. "Wait, why would anyone choose the red cube? The blue sphere sounds like a no-brainer. Evolving sounds awesome. But at what cost?" Professor Reed countered, his tone thoughtful. "If we take the blue sphere, we're essentially handing over our evolution to Xarin. Would we even be human anymore?" "Does it matter?" Tasha asked, her practical mind weighing the options. "If it means survival, isn't it worth it?" Steele folded his arms, his gaze fixed on the pedestal. "Survival without freedom isn't survival. If we let Xarin shape us, we lose what makes us human. Our ability to make mistakes, to learn, to grow on our own terms." Dr. Carter sighed, rubbing her temples. "Both choices have merit. The blue sphere offers security, progress, and a guarantee that we'll thrive. But the red cube, it's riskier, sure, but it keeps our agency intact." Jake remained silent, his mind racing. He felt the weight of their words and the enormity of the decision. Xarin's gaze fell on him, as though sensing the conflict within him. "Jake Miller," Xarin said, its voice softer now. "You have been the guiding force for your kind throughout this trial. The decision is yours to make." Jake's heart sank. "Why me?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Why not let the team decide?" "Because leadership is not about consensus," Xarin replied. "It is about responsibility. You have proven yourself a leader, not by knowledge, not by power, but by understanding what it means to be human. Now, you must choose." The team fell silent, their eyes fixed on Jake. He looked at each of them, seeing their hopes, fears, and trust reflected back at him. His chest tightened. This wasn't just about logic or survival. It was about the soul of humanity. Jake stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the pedestal. He paused, staring at the objects before him. The glowing blue sphere radiated a promise of strength and certainty. The red cube, dimmer by comparison, seemed almost fragile, yet it carried the weight of freedom. He closed his eyes, thinking of everything they had endured, the trials, the sacrifices, the unity they had forged. He thought of humanity's capacity for hope, resilience, and growth. When he opened his eyes, he made his choice. Jake picked up the red cube. A collective gasp echoed behind him. Even Xiran seemed surprised, its form flickering for a brief moment. "You choose preservation," Xiran said, its tone unreadable. "Explain your decision." Jake turned to face his team, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We've made it this far not because we were given power or guarantees, but because we worked together. We fought, we failed, we struggled, but we grew. Humanity's strength comes from its imperfections, its ability to learn and adapt. If we take the blue sphere, we lose that. We lose what makes us human." The team stared at him, their expressions slowly softening. Tasha nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "He's right," she said. Steele crossed his arms, his expression grim but approving. "It's a risky move, but it's the right one." Dr. Carter and Professor Reed exchanged a glance, then nodded in agreement. Even Miles, who had been the most skeptical, sighed and gave Jake a thumbs up. Xiran tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. Then it stepped forward, placing a hand over the red cube. The void around them erupted in light, and a wave of warmth washed over the team. "You have chosen wisely," Xiran said. "Humanity's fate remains in its own hands. This trial is complete, but your true test begins now. Go forth and shape your future." The light grew brighter, enveloping them entirely. When it faded, they found themselves standing back on Earth, in the same spot where they had been taken. The alien ship was gone, and the sky was clear. Jake looked at his team, a sense of relief and pride swelling in his chest. They had passed Xiran's test, but more importantly, they had stayed true to what it meant to be human. The world was watching, and their journey was just beginning.